Okay, Zok the Heilige Mishnah. Beishamai Oymen. Kol hanitnen al mizbech achitoin shenosan b'matana achas kiper. All karbonos except for karbonos that require 4 matanos, one is what would work. In other words, l'chatchila you need 2 matanos, but one it would still be mechaper the carbon. Uvechatos, and if it was a carbon chatos, shtei matanos. Minimum 2 matanos would be morat to the carbon. With silverim, it's all across the board. Av chatos shenosna matana achas kiper. Lefichach, v'balt the first matnes dam is mechaper the entire carbon. Any subsequent matanas dam will have no impact on the carbon. Lefichach and nosan serishona ketikna vesashniach hus lezmana kiper. It's a good carbon because even if you delete that zrika, the first zrika was maratza the carbon. On the other side, if the first matnas dam was given with a machshavas pigel, you don't say that the carbon wasn't completed in a pristine fashion because the shnia was chustum klema, because it's too late already, and the shnia does not have an impact anymore. Therefore, pigel v'chayav and all of cars. Kala nitin alam mizbech hapnimi.
First one was chustum klema.
Then it's chustum klema. Then the carbon is designated as a pigel of chustum klema, so it will be also to eat. It'll be also to eat the meat. Right. The zmano of pigel makes the meat also makes the meat chayiv kares, not the meat one who eats the meat chayiv kares, and the pigel of chusum kleme makes it also to eat the meat, but the person who eats the meat will not be chayiv kares. But matnes on the mizbech hapnimi, the Gemara is going to bring psukim that say that you need to do every single one. Im chiser achas min hamatanos ki illa keeper. That means every single matana is needed down to the last bit. Therefore, lefichach, even a shaylef pouring the shiraim on the asoid is part of the mandatory requirements that will be ma'akev the kaparas carbon. Lefichach noson kulon kesikna. Even if all of the matanas were given properly, the achas shaloi ketikna, and even the last one was shaloi ketikna, psula, it will pass the carbon, the ain't by cars, but there won't be in cars. Okay, gewaltig. Tanu Rabbanan. Minayin lenitnin al mizbech achitoin shenitnan b'matana achas shekiper. Where do we get this information from that any carbon that only needs 2 matanos, 1 matana will be mechaper? Talmud lemer v'dam zevachecha yishafech. Pasuk says, "V'asisa oiloisecha habasar v'adam." Speaking about an oil. Al mizbech Hashem aleikecha, and then it says v'dam zevachecha, all the dam of all the karbonos. Yishafech al mizbach Hashem alechecha. Just needs to be poured on the mizbech, meaning 1 matana would be enough to be maratza all karbanos, except for the chatas. Now we're going to find that there's going to be a 3-way machlokas of what to learn from v'dam zevachecha yishafech, and that's of course going to have fallout. So we're going to try to halk up. So the first lesson that our Gemara suggests is learned from the pasuk of Adam Zevachecha Yishafech is that 1 matana is enough for all karbanos besides the chatas. Correct Gemara, but hi, lahachi udasa. Are you telling me that this is the limit that we extract from Adam Zevachecha Yishafech? We need it for another limit. So now we're going to learn the second thing that is learned from Adam Zevachecha Yishafech. Minayin, how do we know l'chol hadomim? How do you know that no matter what type of carbon you have, when you're finished with the dam and you've already been mekayim the zrikas adam, that any carbon that you have has to be spritzed on the yisoid? Talmud loimer the dam zevachecha yishafech. The dam of all your carbonos needs to be poured onto the yisoid. So now, how could you learn our flagship halacha that we needed, that all karbanos need only 1 mata dam? Zogt Gemara nafkalei midir Rebbe. He will learn the halacha that all the dam at the end that's left over has to be pour down the Yesod, he will learn it from Rebbe's price. The Tanya Rebbe Omer, Vanisher Badam, this is talking about an Oila Sa'if. It says, V'hiza midam achatos alam al kirham mizbeach. Vanisher Badam, the leftover dam in the bird, Yimatzeh should be squeezed out El Yesoid Hamizbech Chatasu. So it says Vanisher Badam Yimatzeh. She'ein Tabelomer Badam. It could have said Vanishar Yimatzeh El Yesoid Hamizbech. We know we're talking about the dam there. Why did it stick in the word Badam? Mata Belomer Badam. L'vishaloi lemadnu ela lenitnin matan dalid she'teunin matan damim liyasoid. We only have a pasuk by Achatos that tells you that the extra blood needs to be poured on the Yesod. Shar damim minayin. How do you know all karbonos, like an oilo and the shlomim and the toida? How do you know the leftover blood of all those karbonos as well need to be poured on the Yesod? Talmud loymar vanishar badam yimotzei. Shein Talmud loymar badam, ma Talmud loymar badam, limed al kol adamim sheteunin matan damim liyesod. Okay, so now just to recap, we have our pasuk of Adam Zevachim Yishafech. It either teaches us what our Mishnah is looking for, that all karbanos only need one matan dam, or it's teaching us that you pour the extra blood on the Yesod. Now the man Damar who learns that you use V'dam Zevachim Yishafech to tell us that you pour the extra dam to the Yesod, how will he know our Mishnah says halacha? He might not hold like that. He might hold that the halacha is not that you only have to have one matan dam. Or he might learn like another sheet in our Mishnah. There's a sheet in our Mishnah who says that all damim, not only a chatos, all damim, one is enough. That man damar is going to bring a different pasuk. For the Gemara, we still need v'dam zevachach yishafeich for something else. V'akata lahachi u'da'asa. How could you say that we're learning from v'dam zevachach yishafeich that you only need one matnas dam? We need v'dam zevachach yishafeich to tell us a third limud. Lichidetanya minayin l'nitnin bezrika shenitnin b'shvicha yatsa. What happens if the halacha on a certain carbon is you have to make zrika? Zrika means you're not standing right near the mizbeach. You're standing a little bit far away from the mizbeach, and you give it a throw. Yishboich means you're right at the mizbeach and you're pouring it down the wall of the mizbeach. Now, zrika can be done with a keli by spritzing it, standing far away. But with a keli, you can also do shvicha. When you're using your finger to spritz, that can only accomplish a zrika. So just to give us some of the mitzias, the physical of what a shvicha looks like and what a zrika looks like. So a keli can accomplish both a zrika or a shvicha, depending on how far from the mizbech you are standing. But with your fingers, you can only do zrika. So minayin l'nitna b'zrika shenatna b'shvicha yatsa. How do you know if it's a carbon that's mechuyev in zrika? If you did shvicha, you'll be yatsa. Which means, how do you know that shvicha is a form of zrika? I'm sorry, how do you know that zrika is a form of shvicha? That's yatsa. So if you were supposed to do zrika on it, if the Torah said do zrika on this carbon, and you did a shvicha, you will be yatsa. However, the opposite is not true. If the Torah tells you to do a shvicha, and you did a zrika, you will not be yatsa. So we're learning from V'dam Zevachecha Yishafeich that if you were supposed to do a zrika and you did a shvicha, that would be kosher as well. So how in the world are we going to know that halakha if you're using V'dam Zevachecha Yishafeich to tell you that all karbanos only need one matana? Zok Gemara, because maybe our Mishnah does not darshan this drasha of V'dam Zevachecha Yishafeich to tell us that you could be yotze zrika with shvicha. Because Savalak Rabbi Kiva, Domer loy zrika bechlal shaficha, v'loy shvicha bechlal zrika. A carbon that you need to do zrika, shvicha will not help, and a carbon that you need to do shvicha, zrika will not help. Because there's actually a pre-listed machlokes tanaim about this specific fact. It's not to be learned. Now, first we need to know what are examples of a carbon that needs a zrika, and what are examples of a carbon that needs a shvicha. So The Karban Pesach, we're going to learn now, there's actually a Machloikis Tanoim. Is the Chiyuv of Zrika's Dam a Zrika, or is it a Shvicha? There's actually going to be a discussion that we're going to have about it right now. At this point, the Gemara is assuming that the Chiyuv for the Karban Pesach, the Chiyuv is Shvicha. So the Gemara wants to know. Now the Chiyuv, at this point, the Gemara thinks that the Chiyuv for Karban Pesach is Shvicha, and the Chiyuv for the Zevach, which Rashi says is the Chagiga, is Zrika. So there's a Chiyuv Shvicha for a Karban Pesach. There's a Chiyuv Zrika for a Karban Chagiga. That's none we learned. There's a bracha that you make on the Karban Pesach, and there's a bracha that you make on eating the Chagiga. Rashi says the bracha on the Pesach is Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam Asher Kedushav B'Mitzvah V'Tzivanu Lechayil HaPesach. And by the Chagiga it would be the same bracha, but Lechayil HaZevach. So there's two different brachas. So that not Berach Birchas HaPesach Pater Eshel Zevach. What if you made a bracha B'Tzivanu Lechayil HaPesach? You'll also be Yosy the bracha for the Zevach. But Shel Zevach, if you made Shekel Shem Lechal HaZevach, Loi Pater Es HaPesach, would not pater the Karban Pesach, Diver Rabbi Shmuel. At this point in the Gemara, Rashi explains it's all dependent upon whether the Zrika of one would work for the other. So at this point, we hold that the Vidam Zevachach Yishofeich tells us that if you did Shvicha when you were supposed to do Zrika, you will be Yosy. So Zokt Rashi Ala Zavach Loi Poter Pesach Vikosol Kedaitach. At this point, the Gemara holds Ubepsachim Nami Hochi Mefarish. In Gemara Psachim, the Gemara is Mefarish this Mishnah the same way. Dikasova Rabbi Yishmael Zrika Bechlal Shaficha. Zrika is included in Shvicha. So therefore, if you did a Shvicha when you're supposed to do Zrika, it would work. Tikidamar le'il minayin l'nitnen b'Zrika shenitnen b'Shvicha yotza. How do you know that if you were supposed to do Zrika and you did Shvicha, how do you know you would be Yotza? So we're saying if you did Shvicha when you're supposed to do Zrika, it would work because Zrika is also a type of Shvicha. Hilchach. Therefore, Matan Dam Shlomim Shekasav Bazrika. The Zevach had to have Zrika. Now we know if you did Shvicha when you're supposed to do Zrika. So on this Karban Shlomim, where you're supposed to do Zrika, if you did Shvicha, it would be kosher. So therefore, the Matan Dam Shlomim Shekasav Bazrika is Bechlal Matan Dam Pesach Shekasav Bazshvicha. So at this point, we're learning that by Pesach, the pasuk tells us that it is Shvicha that is required. So therefore, if you make a bracha on Pesach, the oifen of dam for the Pesach is Shvicha, and the Matas Dam Shlomim, if you did Shvicha on it, it would work. Therefore, the bracha for the Karban Pesach would also work for the Karban Shlomim. V'chibeirach ala Pesach Poter es hazevach shazevach b'chlal Pesach. Because for some reason the Gemara must hold that the way the dam is presented, that defines the type of korban that it is. Mati's asking a good question. What does the method of Zrika have to do with identifying what type of korban it is? So the Gemara at this point,
I can understand, but what's the bracha?
the type, because if it's the same type of korban, if it's the same class of korban, then the bracha would work. Avol berach al hazevach loy potar es Pesach. But if you made a bracha of the zevach, which requires Zrika, it wouldn't pater. If you try doing a Zrika with the Karban Pesach, it would not work, according to the sheet of the Gemara right now, who holds that by Pesach you have to do a Shvicha. So what defines the class of Karban is the method of Zrika. That's what Mati is questioning, and I don't have the answer. I don't know why there's that connection, but we do know that the Zrika is the ritzui of the carbon. So I guess that's the most important pivotal part of the carbon, the way the blood, the spritzing of the blood. So I guess the way the blood spritzed defines a category. But I can't say I understand it. I'm a notion of the man. What?
I have no idea there's different ways of seeing that.
Yeah, there's Rika and there's Shricha. I found that out yesterday. Okay. So right now, we're making two assumptions. We're making the assumption that we learn from the Dam Zevachim Yishafech that when you do Zrika, if you were supposed to do Zrika and you did Shvicha, it would be good, but not the other way around. Therefore, in the Carbon Pesach is included Zrika, but in the Zevach, there's no inclusion for Shvicha. Okay, Gewaltig. So that's how Rabbi Yishmael learns. But we're saying that we're going according to Rabbi Kiva, because Rabbi Kiva argues on this Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Kiva Aimer, loizu poiterasu, loizu poiterasu, which I guess is what Moti's taina is what does the Zrik have a shaykhis to anything? There are two independent items. But the way we're learning now is Zok Rashi, the less lay linitnim bezrika shenitnim b'shvicha yatsa.
Put it this way, if you would end up doing shvicha by the Pesach and shvicha by the chagiga, and you make one bracha for both, does that work?
No, because it's a different bracha. It's a different class of carbon. It's not a question of what you're actually doing. You're actually doing the zrika for the carbon chagiga, and you're actually doing the shvicha. The question is the bracha got mixed up. The bracha got mixed up, but it doesn't mean the zrika got mixed up. But we're saying since
you did the bracha for the Pesach, would be to the
on the Zevach. If you did the bracha for the Pesach, you'd be to the Zevach because the zrika's exactly because you could have done a shvicha. Because you could have done a shvicha. I'm sorry?
You think the opposite. You're saying something specific, it shouldn't include something else. It's like saying for a period of and then something that's not.
I hear. Because a Pesach is a type of Zevach, is what you're saying. So all Pesachs are Zvachim, but not all Zvachim are Pesachs. So I hear. We're hearing Kachum logic now. Kachum logic, the Zrika determines what type of carbon it is. Okay, so just to stay organized, we still have this V'dam Zevachecha Yishafech. If you use it to tell you that Zrika is a form of that Shvicha is a form of Zrika, if you learn it for that, then you can't use it for the side of our Mishnah that one Zrika would be enough for everything. And since Rabbi Kiva learns that one Zrika is enough for everything, he can't learn that Shvicha is a form of Zrika, and therefore he will have to hold that Loizu, Poiterasu, Loizu, Poiterasu, the carbon Pesach needs its independent bracha, and the carbon Chagiga needs its own independent bracha. For Ekta Gemara, we're still not out of the dark, because there's still another purpose that we need V'dam Zevachecha Yishafech for, and therefore you will not be able to use it for the halacha that one Zrika is enough. Rabbi Shmuel Omer, it says in the pasuk, but I believe this is by a Shlomim. It says, "Ach bechor shor." No, we're talking about a bechor. It's obvious what we're talking about. Ach bechor shor, oy bechor kesef, oy bechor eis loy sifta. You're not supposed to be poida these karbanis koideshem, and therefore es domam tizrak ala mizbeach be'eschel dom takdir ishay reach ishay lereach nichoyach l'shem. So Zok Gemara, Ach b'chor shor, oy b'chor kesef, oy b'chor eis. Lomdeinu or lemadnu leb'chor sheton matan domim ve'mur in legabim mizbeach. It's pretty explicit. The pasuk is telling us that by a bechor you have to spritz the dam on the mizbeach and you have to put the chaylev on the mizbeach. Meiser Pesach minayin. How do we know that by Meiser behema and by carbon Pesach you have to do the same? There's nowhere in the Torah where it explicitly states the processing of the carbon Pesach, that you have to spritz the dam, that you have to put the chaylev on the mizbeach. It doesn't say it anywhere beferish. So how do we know by a carbon Pesach that's the halacha? How do I know by Meiser behema that's the halacha? Talmud Loimar v'dam zevachecha yishafech. We have an independent pasuk v'dam zevachecha yishafech to tell us a chiddush of Pesach. So now we have another chiddush here. How are you going to know that Pesach needs zrika stamim? How are you going to know that at Pesach you mark the chelav on the mizbeach? And the same thing by the Ma'aser Beima. How do you know that? You know it from the Dam Zevachim Yishavech. So Zok Gemara, you're right. But our Mishnah will have to disagree with that as well, because our Mishnah learns the Dam Zevachim Yishavech to tell you that one matan is enough. So Savalok Rabbi Yosy Glili, the Tanya Rabbi Yosy Glili Aimer Damoi Loy Nemar. Look at the pasuk Mineu Bey. It says as damam tizrak al mizbech. What do you mean damam? We're talking about one carbon bechar, but as damam ves chalbam is plural. So what is it referring to if not bechar? Damai lo nemar ela damam chalboy lo nemar ela chalbam limed al bechar meiser upesach shatan matan damim veimurin legabe mizbech. What do we learn from here? We learn from here that not only does the bechar require matan damim and Hakravas Eimurim, the carbon Meiser and the carbon Pesach requires that as well. So you're not learning it from a third pasuk of Adam Zivachach Yishafech. You're learning it Mineu Bey. The pasuk of Bechor in and of itself is meramis through the Chalbam and the Damam that other karbanos have the same halacha as this carbon. Now this opens up now a whole new can of worms, if we can call it, because if we're learning that the zrika is coming from Bechor, well, then it's no longer a shvicha, then it's a zrika, because by Bechor you need a zrika, as the mom tizroik al hamizbeach. So if you're going to learn it from Bechor, sure, if you're going to learn it from Bechor, it's going to be a zrika. If you're going to learn it from Adam Zevachim Yishpoich, then it's a shaficha. So if you use the pasuk of Adam Zevachim Yishpoich, then you're going to learn that Korban Pesach needs shficha, which is what we were working with until now. But if you're going to learn it from the pasuk of Bechor, then Korban Pesach itself needs a zrika, which is exactly the same as what's required for the Zavach. So that means if you're going to hold that side the Korban Pesach and side the carbon chagiga has rika, then for sure one should pater the next, right? Because they need exactly the same thing. Yet if you look at the brisa before, we have a two-way machlokes. Either nothing works, or only Pesach pater zevach. But if you hold they both need rika, well then both should work. It's exactly the same zrika required. So that's why Rashi has to explain another reason why the Zevach will not pater the Pesach, but the Bracha of Pesach will pater the Zevach. And the Rashi offers a svara that's exactly opposite to the svara that Duvi gave. That all Zevach, all Pesach is Zevach. No, so Rashi says exactly the opposite. So therefore Rashi says, how would you learn the machlokes if you hold that Tzai Pesach and Tzai Zevach needs Rika? So I'm looking in the Rashi, Trei Tanoya Libud Rabbi Shmuel, and I'm looking to the bottom line of that Rashi. Umiyu Pesach Iker v'Zevach Pafaloi. Hilchach Ein Zevach Poitroi LePesach, because Pesach is the Iker and the Zevach is only coming along to accompany the Korban Pesach. Avo Pesach Poitroi Zevach. So it has nothing to do with domim. It has nothing to do with the blood. It has to do with is the carbon tuffle to it or not, which will be a svar that will be more palpable to Mati as well. Because Mati didn't understand why should the dam determine what type of carbon it is. Right? Okay. Now it just feels good to know that we have company. We're not crazy. There are Tanoi who understood it. We're able to understand a little bit better. Okay. So Zok to Gemara. So we've just said that the Makar of where we know that a Pesach needs Rika is either from V'dam Zevachach Yishafei, which would indicate that it's Shvicha, or it's directly from the pasuk of Bechor, which would say that a Korban Pesach requires Rika. So I never even knew that there was a machlokes tanoim as to how this Rika Sadam occurs in the Korban Pesach. But there is, whether it's a Rika or whether it's a Shvicha. Okay, Gavaltik. For we have a little bit of a problem. Because we said earlier, Divrei Rabbi Shmuel, we said, Berach Bechas Pesach Potter Shal Zevach LePotter Pesach Divrei Rabbi Shmuel. And why? How did we explain Rabbi Shmuel? We explained Rabbi Shmuel that the Korban Pesach needs Shvicha, the Zevach needs Zrika, and Vibalt Shvicha works for Zrika. Therefore, the bracha on the Pesach will work for the bracha on the Chagiga. But that means he has to use the pasuk of Vidam Zivachecha Yishafeich to tell you that Zrika is B'chlal Shvicha. Right? Otherwise, the whole thing doesn't work. So from Rabbi Shmuel up there, you see he holds that Zrika is B'chlal Shvicha, and that's what he learns out of the pasuk Vidam Zivachecha Yishafeich. The problem is Rabbi Shmuel just told us over here that you use Vidam Zivachecha Yishafeich to tell you that the carbon Pesach and the carbon Meiser requires Rikas Damim and Hatar and a Krovus Chalav. So how can you use Vidam Zivachecha Yishafeich to tell you two different things? So Frek the Gemara Rabbi Shmuel Haikra Mapek Leilahaki Umapek Leilahaki. So are you telling me Rabbi Shmuel is using Vidam Zivachecha Yishafeich for two things? Side to tell you that the carbon Pesach requires Shvichas Dam, and side to tell you that Zrika is Bechlal, or Shvicha is Bechlal Zrika. You can't do two things on one pasuk. So Gemara again, Trei Tanoi Alibid Rabbi Shmuel. You're going to have to say that there's a machlokes gufa in what Rabbi Shmuel said. Now this will pose a problem. Why will this pose a problem? Because the earlier Rabbi Shmuel clearly says that from Vidam Zivachecha Yishafeich we learn that Shvicha is Bechlal Zrika. Because that was the whole point of what he used it for. And we said the reason for that is Vidam Zivachecha Yishafeich. But the problem is if you use the pasuk of Vidam Zivachecha Yishafeich to tell you that Shvicha is Bechlal Zrika, that Shvicha works when Zrika is required, so how do you know that Bechlal that a carbon Pesach needs Shvicha? The only way you know that a carbon Pesach needs Shvicha is from Vidam Zivachecha Yishafeich. But if you don't have that pasuk, because you needed to tell you that Shvicha is a form of Zrika, so you don't even know Bechlal Pesach needs Shvicha. So that's the problem that Tosfos asks, which he says, yeah, Kudat Rabbi Shmuel is going to have another pasuk that's not discussed here, another makor here to tell us that the carbon Pesach needs Shvicha. Kezok to Gemara weiter. Bishlama leRabbi Shmuel. I'm sorry. No carbon doesn't say specifically both, but we're saying that a carbon that requires Rika, if you did Shvicha, it would count because Shvicha is a form of Zrika. So Zok to Bishlama leRabbi Shmuel, the Mukim lei Kulei Bibach. According to Rabbi Shmuel, who learned this entire pasuk of Ach Bechor Shor, is not coming to include Damam and Chelbam, is not referring. It's not referring to Meiser and Pesach because he knows Meiser and Pesach from Vidam Zivachecha Yishafeich. So if this pasuk is referring exclusively to Bechor, so then let's ask ourselves, what is the plural of Damam and the plural of Chelbam referring to? What plural? It's only one carbon of Bechor. So it must be referring to Chelbam of the Shor or of the Kesef or of the A's. The plural means the type of Bechor you're dealing with. Are you dealing with, because Sai Bechor Shor, Sai Bechor Kesef, and Sai Bechor A's are included in this pasuk. So Chelbam, Damam means of those three types of animals. So then let's go to the next pasuk. The very next pasuk says, we discussed the Chelev, we discussed the Dam. What about the Basar? Zok the pasuk, Vait Uvis Saram, and the Basar of those same three categories will go to the Kohen. The Basar of the Bechor and the Basar of the and the Basar of the Meiser and the Basar of the Pesach will go to the Kohen. But we know that's not true. So Zok to Gemara, Bishlamel Rabbi Yishmael the Mukim lekuli bebechar hainu dechsev uvisaram yilach. So when it says uvisaram, it's also referring to the three types of bechors. Elul Rabbi Yosy aglili the Mukli nami b'Meiser Pesach. But Rabbi Yosy aglili who said Chelbam and Damam is referring to other karbanos. Are you going to say uvisaram as well is referring to other karbanos and the meat of the Pesach and the meat of the Meiser? Are you suggesting goes to the Kohen? That's not true. How could that be? Meiser Pesach Bailam Achlile. It goes to the Bailam. So Uvisaram surely cannot be referring to the other karbanos. So Uvisaram cannot be referring to the same Damam and Chelbam. It can't. the problem, how are you going to fatayich it? And it's not referring to Bechar Shor, Bechar Kesef, and Bechar Eis, because we already said Chelbam, and the mum is not referring to the three types of animals. So what is Uvis Haram referring to? Zok to Gemara, my Uvis Haram, Yelach, Echatam Vechet Bamum. Uvis Haram, we're going back only to the Bechar, but there's two classes of Bechar. There's a Bechar Bamum, and there's a Bechar that doesn't have a Bamum. You know what you do with the meat of a Bechar that's not a Bamum? After you makter the Murin, the meat goes to the Kohen. You know what you do with a Bechar Balmum? The whole thing goes to the Kohen. So Uvis Haram, the meat of both types of Bechar, side out with a mum, side out without a mum, will still be eaten by the Kohen. Echotam Vechet Balmum, Limei, it teaches us an important halacha in the halacha Bechar, Al Bechar Balmum Shenitain LeKohen. The Bechar Balmum gets given to Kohen. Normally, in most cases, what do you do with a Balmum? You're paid it, and with the money you buy another carbon, and when you're paid, whatever is paid, you get to keep it. So this is a very unique scenario that even if it's a Balmum, you're not paid it. What do? You give it to the Kohen anyway. You never find such an unusual scenario that a carbon with a mum, you just give it to the Kohen. Normally, what you do with a carbon with a mum is you redeem it. Frank Gemara of Rabbi Shmuel doesn't have this Uvis Haram, because according to Rabbi Shmuel, Uvis Haram is referring to before I make a mistake, according to Rabbi Shmuel, what did we say Uvis Haram is referring to? Rabbi Shmuel learns Uvis Haram is referring only to the it's referring only to the Bechar, right? Because Rabbi Shmuel said you learn it out of Dam Zevachecha. Right. So according to Rabbi Shmuel, that the pasuk is referring only to Bechar. Rabbi Shmuel Naftale Milacha Yia the Seifa. So according to Rabbi Shmuel, who learns that one second. The Sefer Rashi says, "Uvisaram yilach." Let's have a look at the pasuk again. Uvisaram yilach kachazeh atnufa uchashay kayamin uchshakam l'chayia. So it says l'chayia a second time to tell you that even though he learns Uvisaram is referring, even though Uvisaram is referring to all other karbanos, right? According to Rabbi Shmuel, it's only Rabbi Shmuel learns other kabbalas from the Dams of Echachi Shavech. So Uvis Haram is referring to only that of a Bechar. Uvis Haram is referring only to that of Bechar. So the question is, so Uvis Haram is Echad Balmum, ve'echad Tam. So what's the question of Rabbi Shmuel?
No, the plural of Uvis Haram,
right?
Is talking about the three carbon Bukhari. But according to Rabbi Yosy Glili, what's the plural for? The plural is for Samum.
So according to Rabbi Shmuel, that's referring to all three Bukharis. How are you going to know that a Bukhar Balmum goes to the Kohen? Well, thank you. The Sefer, because it says the second time L'chayah. So there was some L'cha, which could be referring to a Tam, and then again it says L'chayah, which is referring to a Balmum. Okay, thank you. I was getting mixed up with the Cheshvan. Zoktamar Bishlamel Rabbi Yosy Glili. The Mukile Nami, the Maestru Pesach. According to Rabbi Yosy Glili, who learns that the pasuk Mineu Be of Bechar, Damam and Chabam, refers to Maestru and Pesach, Hainu Dechsiv, Loi Sifta Ki Kodesh Shem. And now we learn from Loi Sifta that Haim Kravim, the Ein Timurasan Kravim. Now there is a similarity between the carbon Pesach and the carbon Meiser to Bechar. And there's two similarities. One is that Hain Craven, the Ain Tamura on Craven. Meaning, if you make a Tamura of a Bechar, Utanan we learned, Tamuras Bechar, Umaiser. What if you made a Tamura of a Bechar, or you made a Tamura of a Meiser? So you took a regular Chul animal, you said Zu Tamura Su, the halach is Hain, Uvladon, Vladan, Atzoif Kol Ha'olam, Harehain Kebechar Umaiser, V'yoichlu B'muman Lebailim. These are items that you will never be Poida B'muman. You'll never be Poida the Tamura of a Bechar or a tumor of a meiser, you'll never be pointed. If it gets a mum, it'll be eaten by the bilim with a mum. So how do you know this halacha? How do you know this halacha by meiser and by Pesach? We know it by Bechor, but how do we know it by meiser and by Pesach? If you hold that this pasuk that's talking about Bechor is also referring to meiser and to Pesach, so then all of these extra halachas we now have a makor for them by Korban Pesach and by Korban Meiser, because we learn it from Bechor. Tonight we learned the same halacha by a Korban Pesach. Rabbi Shua, Shemaiti, I heard Shetamuras Pesach Kreva. Sometimes you're makriv on the mizbeach, the tamur of a Pesach, but sometimes utamuras Pesach ain't a kreva, the ain lila farish, and I can't remember which is what type of tamuras Pesach would be kreva and what type wouldn't. So Rashi tells us the type that would be kreva is if it's already not needed anymore and it became a shlomim. So the tamur of a shlomim would be kreva because it's like every other shlomim. But if it's still this man Korban Pesach and you made a tamur of a Korban Pesach, you're not going to be makriv it. So let's see what Rashi says over here. Vein levash hay kreva, I like kreva. The kaimelon, the truma shehemer boy acher Pesach would be kreva, because that's a tamur shlomim. The shehemer boy koidim zvanai loy kreva, the tamur sapesachi. So once again, we know a halacha that the tamur of a Pesach you're not makriv. We know a halacha that the tamur of a meiser you're not makriv. But what's the makar? If you're going to say that the pasuk of Bechor in Bechor Shor Bechor Ezer, when it says Chelbam and Damam, it also means to include Meiser and Pesach. Then whatever halacha we know by Bechor, I understand why that will also apply to Meiser and Pesach. But the problem is, El Rabbi Shmuel, the Mukalet Kulei Bechor. But according to Rabbi Shmuel, who holds that the only way you know the Zrikas Dam by Pesach and by Meiser is from V'dam Zevachim Shafech, not from the pasuk, and the plural of Chelbam and the plural of Damam is going on a different type of behemoths exclusively by Bechor. So Meiser Pesach, the Lekrev Tmurason Minole. What is the makor that Meiser and Pesach you're not makriv their Tmura like you would by every other carbon? Zok the Gemara, Meiser has a special limud. Gomer ever mi Bechor. You know how we know the halacha from Bechor? It's because by Bechor it says v'havarta kol peter rechem a lashon of havara, and by Meiser it says kol asher yavor tachas hashovet. So we learn Gzera Shava from the two words of havara to tell you that the same halacha that you have by Bechor that ain't Tmuras and Kreva will apply to Meiser as well. Pesach behed yaksivbe Pesach it says kesef. It says let's see the lashon pasuk. It says im kesef hu makriv as karbanai v'hikriv oisai lifnei Hashem. So it says kesef. Matam im kesef. It could have said kesef hu makriv and explain what to do. But why did the pasuk stick in the extra word im in front of the word kesef? Kesef. Matam im kesef. L'rabbis temuras haPesach acher haPesach shetikriv shlom. To tell you that if you made tamur on the Korban Pesach after Pesach, it's treated like a shlom, and you would be makriv on the mizbech like a shlom. Yochel af lefnei Pesachim. You would think even bisman Pesach, if you made a tamur of a Pesach, you're makriv as a Korban Pesach or as a shlomim. Talmud hu. It says in Kesef hu makriv. Davka after Pesach, where your Pesach automatically morphed into a shlomim. That's when you will be makriv the tamura as a Korban shlomim. But if you made a tamura on the Korban Pesach during his Zman Pesach, then you would not be makriv. So you have an independent limud, even though we don't learn it out of the Chol. Frag the Gemara, v'chol hanech tanoi, the mafki lei l'hai dam zevachecha yishafech l'drasha achrina. We had so many different options of what you can learn out of dam zevachecha yishafech, besides our main flagship limud that one matnas dam would be enough. Right? We use this for dam zevachecha yishafech to tell you that the Korban Pesach needs shvicha. Or we lose the dam zevachecha to tell you that shvicha is bechlal zrika. What are they going to do with our Mishnah? How are they going to know that one matnas dam is enough? Hi kol anitna mizbech achiton shenos matana achash shekiper minaluhu. Zok the Gemara sorry Luke Beisil. They'll hold it Beisil. Beisil said that this halacha even applies to a chatos, not only to a zevach. the Amri Av Chatos should not the Matanachas keeper v'yalfi kuli mechatos. Reb Yosy, the Gemara later on is going to tell, Basil is later on going to tell us his makor. How do I know that even for carbon chatos, one matnas dam is enough? And whatever his pasuk will be, that will equally apply to all karbanos. So therefore, you don't need v'dam zevachecha yushafeich to tell it to you by other karbanos. Zokamar b'chatos, we said shtei matanos is enough. Amar Abhuna, my timer de Beis Shammai, because it says in the pasuk of carbon chatos 3 times the word karnos. And I'm going to read the psukim inside. It says, "V'lokach hakoyin midam achatos be'esboi v'noson al karnois mizbach ha'olah." Karnois is spelled with out of. Then it says by later on in the pasuk, it says, "V'lokach hakoyin midam be'esboi v'noson al karnois mizbach ha'olah." Again without of. And the third time it says, "V'lokach hakoyin midam achatos be'esboi v'noson al karnois mizbach ha'olah." And although our Chamashim have it without of, the Gemara had a pasuk. The Gemara had a girsha that it was there with the vav. So karnois plus karnois is 2 and 2 is 4, and karnois with a vav would bring it to 6. Hare kan sheish. So if you have now 6 times that it's mentioned karnois, we apply the 6 occurrences of karnois as follows. Arba lemitzvah. L'chatchila, there's a mitzvah to do 4 zrikas, but ushtayim la'akev, but 2 of them are ma'akev. Okay, gewaltig. So again, by 2 of these occurrences, it says karnois chaser. By 1 of them, it says karnois mole. According to Beis Shammai, you read each one as if it's 2, even the ones without the vav. You read them all as if it's 2, and therefore 2 plus 2 plus 2 is 6. If you have 6 times where it says karnois, 4 to be lechatchila and 2 to be makif. Ubeisilo karnois. The ksiv on 2 of them are singular. So karnas 1 and 1, and the one with the vav would be 2. So you have a total of 4. Hare kan arba. Now I only have 4 occurrences of karnois. How will I apply it? Shalosh lemitzvah. 3 are a mitzvah. V'achas la'akev, and 1 is ma'akev. And that's why only 1 is enough. Frek the Gemara. Ve'makulu mitzvah. Maybe if there's only 4 incidents of karnois, maybe it means it's only a mitzvah. Maybe lechatchila you have to spritz dam. B'diavad, if you didn't spritz any dam at all, it would still be a kosher carbon. Zaktamar, that's not logical. Kapar b'chti lo yashkech. You will never find any carbon that will be mechaber without any zrikas dam at all. He doesn't only look at mikra, he doesn't only look at mesiris. He doesn't only look at the way it's pronounced, and he doesn't only look at the way it's written. And therefore, you make a compromise. Ahani mikra v'ahani mesiris. So, according to Beis Shammai, that you hold yeshem mikra, they're all read plural. So therefore, he said 2 plus 2 plus 2 is 6. According to Beis Hillel, he wanted to focus on the Messiah. Twice karnois is written without the vav, and only 1 is written with the vav. So that would be a total of 4. So instead of Beis Hillel saying, I stick to my position, I'll make a compromise. I will look at the Messiah as well, and therefore, you say 6, I say 4, I'll give and I'll say 5. So now I have 5 occurrences of karnois, so we compromise, and therefore we'll say it's a total of 5. So if I have 5, I have 4 lemitzvah and 1 la'akev. Okay, we'll stop here because it's 10 to 7, because now we're going to other occurrences of these types of words. So we'll stop here. So at the end of the day, the v'dam zevachecha yishafeich